Testing 1, 2, 3. Okay, here we go. Welcome to this podcast. In this podcast, what I want to do is talk about the placement of Uranus in the fourth house. Now, Uranus is not a functional light that I talk about very frequently in my podcast, so this should be interesting. What is Uranus? So I'm going to start by describing what Uranus is, and I'm going to describe it as a functional light. And I've already said that functional lights are awarenesses. They are points of consciousness, or they are flavors of consciousness, just like you have different types of particles in physics. You have an electron, you have a proton, you have a neutron. Well, you have different types of consciousnesses. And the things that separate the consciousnesses, they are like flavors. They're degrees of change. You can imagine them as degrees of change in the density of knowing. So when it comes to the sun, for instance, it's a focal point because your attention is focused on that. The area is kind of narrowed and limited so that your consciousness can form a kind of laser in some sense. And what that simply means is that you can focus on a very small area of your perspective, or a very small, narrow area of the story that you're telling yourself. Now, focusing on it like that has tremendous benefits in the sense of how we use our will, for instance, in the sense of the sun, right? You can resolve things into greater detail when you focus like that. And that way you can deepen the nature of the story that you are telling. You can find different pathways that you wouldn't otherwise see. Now, at the other extreme, you have the functional light of Neptune. And if the sun itself is a focus and drive, Neptune is the exact opposite. It is a dispersion in some sense, where the focal awareness disperses into everything. So it's like taking one breath of everything, taking in everything in existence in one go. Of course, you lose access to any detail whatsoever. But what you get is the broadest possible picture. And since it's never ending really, because, the solar system just continues outward until you get to the other boundary of the other star. So you just keep going in a sense, all right? And that means that your perspective on oneness or the unity of all things just keeps going and going, all right? Nothing to really stop you. And in that type of perspicacity, focusing is not allowed, except you're focusing on everything. And when you're focusing on everything, it's like you're focusing on nothing. That's basically what it is. So these are the functional lights, the degree of the density of awareness of the functional lights. That's why I call them functional lights, because they are lights of consciousness or lights of awarenesses. Now, we're going to make the entry into Uranus. No pun intended for those who like a giggle when it comes to the name Uranus. By looking at Neptune. Because like I've just said, Neptune is a dispersion of some kind where everything is united in one holistic vision. Well, Uranus is a slowdown of that, because that one holistic vision, you can't really do it. So what you do is you connect everything, almost like in a random sense, trying to unite everything together in your perspective or in your mind, or in the story that you're telling yourself. You're trying to look for the grandest possible meaning, okay? But it's something that you are doing in some type of sense, because it's like a trance. And in a trance-like state, you lose access to details. You are subsumed in some sense in the whole connectivity of it all. So you lose yourself in some sense. Well, you can imagine it as some type of blur. Imagine that you are on a carousel. The faster you go, the wider environment blurs. And if you go pretty fast, by the time you begin to hit a few Gs, everything around you appears like one continuous blur. Okay? Now, that's what Neptune is. That's what Pisces is, really. Because in order to make that continuous blur, you are spinning very fast, all right, around the central point. But as you begin to slow down, the details of that environment surrounding you, they begin to come into view. Uranus is the first slowdown of Neptune. And so what happens is you still get a sense of the holistic, but it's now more difficult to put together. So you get glimpses, you get flashes, you get intuitions. You don't really take in the whole thing, even though that you intuit that there must be a holistic framework or a holistic perspective somewhere just down the line. But because you are slowing down, you don't really have access to it. What you have are bits and pieces which you now begin to put together. That is, if you can, because the flashes themselves, they are no respecter of space and time. Because this blur that Neptune and Pisces represent is not just the holistic nature of space, it is also the holistic nature of time. And the reason why human beings do that is because that's the next evolution really of our consciousness, in the sense that we are going to unify this focal point of the sun with this diffuse nature of Pisces and Neptune, so that we can look what's beyond there. That's the entire point. Because we have to grow. And the process of looking at what is beyond there, beyond the Piscean realm, is the process of elevating our stories. The stories we tell ourselves, or like I said in one of my podcasts, these stories are sexual stories. And we are elevating them. We want to elevate them beyond Pisces, beyond Neptune, into the wider reaches of the cosmos. That's what we really want to do, because the cosmos is there containing the potential for all this elevation. And if possible, we can elevate it into another star system. And then we see what the type of consciousness is in another star system. Just like we have our own kind of consciousness around the star that we call our sun. Okay? So that star system would be, what type of focal point do they have there? What type of focal point are they experiencing there? What happens to human consciousness if you focus it around a different type of star? These are questions. Because don't forget that these stars, they are focal points in some sense. I have a podcast where I explain that. I don't even know if it's published yet. Where I explain that the stars themselves, they're like tuning forks, you understand? So while being born, or while determining what theater of experience that you're going to incarnate around, you tune into a particular frequency, in quotes, frequency because it's just figurative, right? And that frequency is the frequency of the star, but it's not the star itself, it's the gravitational field, the complex nature of the gravitational field that star and its surrounding bodies are sitting in. It's very complex. It's complex enough it is a unique fingerprint. Okay? And you tune into it and you localize on the theater of experience around that star, if such a thing exists, because not every star has life or complex life. And I've already said in one of my other podcasts that human life is very specific in the sense that it requires a very well prescribed theater of experience in order to incarnate, and that there are special points in the galaxy where you find planets like that around life-giving suns where a human can incarnate. Okay? And it's all based on gravitational physics. It's not based on mumbo jumbo or some type of pseudoscientific nonsense. Okay? This is all based on the unique fingerprints that gravity forms with other things. Okay? So Uranus is the slowdown of that Neptunian light. And what it does, it allows various aspects of this unity to come into view for very brief moments in time, because it's almost as if we go fast and then we stop. We go fast and then we stop. All right. It's a kind of haphazard perception. So while Uranian insights are coming in, because they come in flashes, and these flashes are very powerful because we experience them as intuitive flashes. And when they come in, you will know that they're different. Why? Because they have the power and the potential to change the way that you behave or whatever it is you're doing at that point in time. And they could change them pretty drastically. That's how powerful they are. Because there are some things that you don't know how you know them, but it doesn't really bother you that you don't know how you know them. All right. You don't consider those things as important. There's some other things that you suddenly realize. They dawn on you in such a powerful way. They stop you in your tracks and they cause you to change direction or change behavior or change awareness or whatever it is, but you are modifying your story. So these Uranian impulses, they are powerful in the sense that they have the ability to modify the ongoing narrative. And usually when there's change coming for you in your reality or in the flow of your narrative, they are always preceded by Uranian transits. Okay? Because you have to be willing to be able to accept the change. And so there are preparatory stages that allow you to experience change. It depends on how the transits are coming in. If they're coming in too hot, then it will come in as a kind of shock or some type of whatever. But there's a reason for that. The essence of these Uranian insights is to help to construct the unity of Neptune in such a way that it can be understood. Because the problem with Neptunian unity is that once you take in all the fullness of it, you lose access to the details. You lose access to the granular meaning of it all. And so such impulses like the Neptunian light, they tend to spiritualize people. Simply what that means is that you are induced into a trance-like state where the details no longer matter to you. because there's really nothing you're going to use it for. Instead, you experience the oneness of it all as a flow. Some type of flow wherein which your intuition, your rational faculties, everything just blends into some type of oneness. And a lot of people describe these things as spiritual experiences because it's as if you begin to have access to realities beyond this one. And simply what that means is that you begin to have access to higher cognitive functions of your imagination. You begin to have access to higher cognitive faculties wherein you begin to project different imaginative thoughts. And the things that are projecting the imaginative thoughts, they are lured in, they are drawn in by a search for beauty. Okay? And this is very important because this is what makes us human. This search for beauty. And when we begin to use our imagination in a way that we begin to experience a connection with oneness, a kind of flow that some people have defined as a spiritual experience or a divine flow, wherein you may even know something and you have no idea what it means. Not even close. You may perceive the essence of a oneness. You may say one or two things about it, but every time you try to say things about it, it never really comes out in any form, any detailed form that anyone can really have any utility for. It comes out as a spiritual experience. Or it's as if you're describing a reality that can only be accessed via the imagination. Of course, the challenge with this type of perception is that if you don't know, because you're still a limited physical being, if you don't remember that you are still a limited physical being that needs to participate in a limited world, then you forget where the boundaries are. Everything blurs in. And once that begins to happen, the individual, as observed in a physical experience by others, they begin to experience mental problems. That's how we see it. That's how normal people would see that person. Because they're disconnected completely across space, across time, and across logic. Okay? And that's not their fault. It's just, there's a tuning, because everybody has Neptune, obviously. Everybody has Uranus and all that. But if the tuning is such that it is sitting at a very high level in a natal chart, usually that is because it is required for something else. But if it's not sitting correctly and being channeled correctly, then the individual's perception strays beyond the confines of the solar system, okay, beyond the boundaries of Saturn, beyond the boundaries of structure. And the individual is in some type of, or immersed in some type of imaginative reality, okay, where boundaries blur and they can't really function anymore as normal people in the Saturnian type of reality that we're experiencing, okay. Uranus is a slowdown of that. And it slows down in such a way that you begin to perceive how this unity is put together. So that your description of that unity is no longer confined to a spiritual experience or some type of mystical experience. You begin to describe it in a level that corresponds with the most advanced science possible. Because that's really what it is. Okay? Any sufficiently advanced science appears like magic or mysticism. But if you don't know how, then it remains in the realm of mysticism. And the danger with that is illusion. All right, where you can no longer tell the difference between something that is real and something that's just nonsense. So Uranus is the process via which you begin to bring down this extreme high-level intelligence of Neptune. You begin to bring it down into the material world. But in Uranus, it still appears as a wildfire in some sense. And simply what that means is that the structure of thought in human thinking, the way it happens in your brain is that it's a pattern. It's a pattern of electrical activity. All right? Whatever you consider to be logic, once you think about 1 + 1 = 2, it's a rational logic, right? But that logic is encoded as wirings in your brain. And whenever you think of 1 + 1 = 2 and you confirm to yourself that this is right, you are making a connection within very specific patterns in your brain. And those patterns, based on the principles of organized complexity, which is my book, published 2011 and 2020, based on those patterns, there is a very detailed network of how logic is laid in your brain to represent the relational orders. That's the basis of our self-consciousness. Numbers, okay? Or the ability to conceptualize relational orders, numbers, geometries. Everybody does it, whether you're good at math or not. Math is just a language that we developed to represent this, but you are representing a part of yourself. Uranus is a higher level perspicacity on this wiring, this circuit in your brain, this pattern in your brain, such that you are not only able to see that pattern, but you are able to see how that pattern connects with other patterns in a very haphazard, unclear sort of way. So it looks chaotic, but it's not, because with training, you can retrieve useful information. That's what most of the brilliant scientists do. Brilliant composers, brilliant musicians, brilliant anything really. That's why Uranus is the energy of genius. But you see, there's a very thin line, like I've said, between genius and madness. Okay? The essence of it all is being able to connect it to something that is already within Saturnian reality. Then you can now make a breakthrough of some kind. Okay? So people who have significant Uranian placements, their job is to embody this because they're already it. Okay? And they must realize what it is so that it can sit properly. Then you realize that, look, if you've been given significant Uranian placements, it's because you have the ability to elevate these patterns, rational patterns in your brain. You can elevate them into realms where you can find innovative connections, because most of it looks like nonsense. It looks like chaotic noise, but it's not. Okay? If you see the pattern in your head that makes up 1 + 1 = 2, you'd be shocked. 1 + 1 = 2 is very simple. It's very simple to visualize, right? But if you saw the representation, the neuronal representation, the brain chemistry of it all in your head, you'd be shocked. The level of complexity is beyond stupefaction. Okay? So obviously, being able to experience Uranian insight is that this representation, this complex representation, you are able to perceive it more clearly than just 1 + 1. You are now able to see, in some sense, what that 1 + 1 really means, how it is being put together. And initially, when you begin to have Uranian insights, they will startle you because you don't know what they are, especially when you have Uranus sitting very early in your natal chart. You don't know what it is, okay? You don't know why you're having flashes of intuition, and most of the time it doesn't make any sense. It's one of the reasons why very early traditional astrologers said that Uranus is a malefic experience, meaning it basically just creates problems, because the reality is not complex enough to understand what that thing is. You know, human beings are meant to behave or human beings, in order to live lives, we create structure in our reality. And the structure is pretty much very simple. It revolves around meeting our basic needs, etc. So we don't really have the space for this Uranian type of noise making or pattern matching or whatever you call it. Okay? Maybe in the modern era, as people begin to delve deeper into advanced physics or advanced computing and things like that, maybe they can find patterns for that, but it won't really be successful. Why? Because these things, remember, Uranus is what takes you into Neptune, just like Aquarius is what takes you into Pisces. And the reason is because when you begin to trace the connections from the largest neurons in your head, they're called pyramidal cells, and you begin to look at them as they connect, and you keep going all the way into details. Where do you stop? Because if you keep going, at some point you're going to hit subatomic particles. Now, are you the subatomic particles? And what's beyond the subatomic particles? Because there is a potential for greater structure all the way to the Planck scale. Alright, so what does that even mean? It means that your reality emerges from a concept space that I call a knowledge space. That's what I call it in my book. Okay? And it exists, but its full structure is obviously hidden. And so by experiencing this concept space as a self, we are mapping into knowledge. That's really what it is. So that when we study the universe, we cannot help but also study ourselves. This is the essence of Uranus, because that's the journey that Uranus is trying to lead. It's the aspect of your consciousness that you can say it sort of remembers this. And the memory itself is kind of haphazard. So it comes in flashes. It comes and goes almost without warning. All right. And it often comes at the most inappropriate times because we don't know what to do with it. And the reason for that is because the pattern that Uranus represents is far more chaotic than what we have as our physical reality, the type of lives we live in societies. Okay? These patterns exist on levels that you can more easily find in the wild, like in nature. No, nature is very wild in that sense, but the wildness of nature represents a logic that is beyond our everyday understanding because we tend to simplify things in order to understand them. Nature doesn't need to simplify anything. It can work into the tiniest detail and connect it to the largest structure. And this ability to connect the tiniest possible scales to the largest possible scales is what I call the prime signal. Okay? I have podcasts on the prime signal, but they're for my members only for now. But these are Uranian insights because they are the things that take you from the high level awarenesses and they bring you down into reality if you can handle the connections. Okay? That's always the thing about Uranus. if you can handle the connections. One way to successfully do it is with this type of podcast. Now you know what's going on. You know where those flashes are coming from. They're coming from you. They're coming from a part of you that is ascending in some sense. So it gets into a reality system where it's able to see across space and across time. It doesn't really see the full picture, but it gets a snapshot. So what do? You document it. You don't need to do anything with it if you don't want to. All right. It can be powerful, yes. But if you understand what is going on, you can document it. The idea is to build a picture, a complete picture. And you're going to get that complete picture scattered across space and across time. It may even take years. But when you look at your documentation and it still doesn't make any sense to you, then you don't have the complete picture yet. Okay? Now, when Uranus begins to impinge on consciousnesses, either through transits or progressions or thereabouts, then it opens up that aspect of your faculty that is better able to connect with this chaos. Because like I've said, it's not really chaos. It's just a high level pattern. Okay? Now, what is the fourth house? Being a house means that it's a receptor. That's what houses are. They're receptors for experiences. And so, in other words, our life experience on earth can be divided. In fact, I call the life experience on earth a theater of experience. Okay? That's the human experience. And within that theater, there are narratives being enacted. That's why I call it a theater. Now, you can divide that theater further, just imaginatively. The divisions don't actually exist. But just imaginatively, you can divide that theater into 12 spheres of experience. Those are the 12 signs. Okay? Now, there are many reasons why this is done, but I'm not going to go into all that. Now, within those theaters of experience, we get to understand how that area of our life is. And that area is the receptor for a particular type of story. The signs bring the context of those stories. The houses just receive it. The houses don't change. They receive what they receive. But they must receive it within the context of the sign that is supplying it and the nature of themselves. So the issue with houses is how best something is sitting. That's the issue with house placements. They tell us about how a functional light is sitting or how that part of the psyche is sitting. And the idea is that when something sits correctly, you get the maximum benefit from it because you know what to do with it. First of all, you know what it is. You know what to do with it. And then it becomes a strength. And usually when people are successful or when people are achieving what it is that they're trying to achieve, it's because of something that is sitting correctly within them. Because whatever it is, they can see it clearly. Why? Because they can see that part of themselves clearly. They know what to do. And knowing what to do is a very important part of experience in the knowledge space. Okay? Now, the fourth house is the house that receives the basic sitting of your consciousness. You can think of it as the most stable part of yourself. So if all the other areas, you can think of them as floors on a high-rise building. Well, the fourth house is like the ground floor. And let's don't get too carried away with the analogy because it's not exactly correct. The ground floor in this analogy is that they are the things about you that you really want to keep very stable because they are the things that you understand very well. And because you understand them very well, you don't need to keep figuring them out. There are things that you have figured out already. And so you store them there as a kind of repository. All right. Now, anytime you want to reconfirm who you are, those are the things you look at consciously or unconsciously, because the laying down patterns, they are done unconsciously. And the pattern within which these things are laid down, they define your early experience as an infant. An infant that's being nurtured. And that process, what does it look like? It looks like the acquisition of self-knowledge. The fourth house is the end of the first quadrant, which is the end of the first acquisition of knowledge, the first stage. That's why it's a basic, very basic natural sitting, because you can think of it as a waterfall. The top of the waterfall is the ascendant, and then things just flow down. Well, they're trying to flow into the fourth house. The idea of flowing into the fourth house is so they can sit, because when they sit, they become the foundation upon which the natural storyteller of Leo will emerge. Okay? Because that Leo is the thing that's now going to actively, energetically that is, begin to modify its story until it takes it all the way to Aquarius. It's very, very important. Okay? So, Uranus in the fourth house, it's a contradiction of some kind. But there are always reasons why these contradictions exist, because they become the ingredients around which greater structure will be formulated. That is, greater structure in the life story of the person. So when you see Uranus in the fourth house, you already know that you're looking at some type of twist in the life story, but it's a twist that is designed to create friction. Because, just like in crystal formation, you need a dislocation in some sense in order to seed the growth of the crystal. Okay? Like an impurity of some kind. Well, that's what Uranus in the fourth house is. It's not meant to be comfortable there. It's meant to create a type of friction, which the individual now focuses on resolving. Because you can imagine that these insights, these Uranian insights, they just keep blaring into the foundation of this person, where this person is trying to sit a very stable structure. That stable structure is what you call familiarity. And it has one unique thing about it. It does not allow the existence of fears and anxieties. So you can think of it as the figurative extension of your gut. Because the things that you know in that area, you don't really question them. You don't put them there so that you can question them every day or every week or every year. In fact, when major changes begin to occur there, they feel very upsetting in some sense. Okay? So this fourth house, once it's stable for long enough, the idea is that it is supposed to deliver into the psyche a sense of self-acceptance. That sense of self-acceptance then goes on to birth conviction. Conviction is what launches the ego because it gives you the conviction to be able to modify your story. If you don't have the conviction to modify your story, then your life is going to feel very trapped. You're going to feel like you have no control, like you have no power, like you have no significance. Okay, so it's a very essential process. And at the temperature of the entire process of this water falling downhill into a container, so to speak, the essence of it is what the fourth house is telling you about. It is the essence of the sign of Cancer, and it is a symbolic nature of the moon. Okay, so it's a receptacle in some sense, and it receives in a homely manner, because most people associate the fourth house, the sign of Cancer, with home, family, and all that. But what it really is familiarity. And the thing about familiarity is that it doesn't really entertain much questioning because everything there is safe. It's safe in the sense that you know what it is at any point in time. Now, figuratively, the fourth house is the house that takes away anxiety. It takes away questions so that the individual can sit very stably. I call it self-acceptance because in that fourth house, everything that is there, the sign on the cusp and any functional light in the fourth house, that's what your life story is telling you to accept. And it can be maddening. And just one example of that is Uranus in the fourth house. Because you're going to experience Uranian insight. It's a natal placement. So you're going to experience Uranian insights for life. And until those insights and the way of being, until those types of triggers or those types of interventions, until they become familiar, comfortable patterns for you, you're going to keep running from that part of yourself. Because Uranus in the fourth house is the opposite of what the fourth house is really trying to achieve in that sense. In some sense, Neptune in the fourth house is more comfortable. Why? Because the individual is just in a trance. And a trance is a trance. It's like a dream state. They're not bothered about the details because it's a flow. Let's go with it. When the slowdown begins to occur, like you have in Uranus in the fourth house, then the individual is suddenly jarred by new types of experiences. And here's how it works, because it's not exactly momentous all the time. For instance, you see a certain type of color. And you've seen this color many times, but now you're seeing it at a particular time where the sun is very low in the sky. And so there's a kind of shade that is falling on the color, and the shade makes some type of shadow that gives you a sudden and urgent recollection of something that you don't even know anything about. In that brief instant, you're able to connect disparate concepts that you don't even know about. You connect them into a structure that you have no idea what it is. And as a result of that, something clicks in your head. It's like, wait a second, but this is how this is going on, and this is how this is going on. But what's just happened there? You see, these are not mystical processes. They're taking place in your head, and they're the kind of interactive processes that can occur between different types of complex networks. Because remember, your brain is a complex network. The average adult human is said to have 85 billion neurons. And neurons are not the only type of cells in your head. There are so many types of cells. People are still discovering different types of cells in the human brain. Not to even talk of their interactivity or what they're doing or their functionality. It's something, this is why I started the 5 principles of organized complexity, to be able to look at these things in a very different way. And what the Uranian insights are telling us is that these networks, they may all be connected as one, or they may interact as separate modules. And the modulation itself, or the modular forms themselves, they're not categorically defined. They are amorphous. They change shape, structure, different parts of the brain interact with different parts of the brain. And these things are taking place even simultaneously on very many different levels. Once you look at it without having access to what it's doing, it looks exactly like chaos. It looks like noise. But it's not noise because you are experiencing yourself as a coherent whole. That's really what it is. And this is taking place inside your head. And it doesn't matter what you're thinking about. You could be thinking about 1 + 1 = 2. It's about the simplest thing you can think about, right? Wrong. Because the level of complexity underlying that basic type of thinking is stupefying. So when it comes to the fourth house, there are two possible states of awareness. If things sit comfortably, then you create a unified ego. And by sitting comfortably, I mean when the amount of rejection that you're directing at yourself is not that large. Okay? I'm not going to quantify it in terms of percentages or whatever, but it's not a two-state switch, basically. It's not just on or off. Everybody has something they're dealing with, and that's the level of rejection that you're processing deep within yourself. And what you're trying to accept is the nature of what sits in the fourth house. Okay? And the fourth house is a place where the only condition for acceptance is safety. And safety means that something is known. Something does not feel threatened. And simply what that means is that there are no questions regarding this thing. All right? And very few things are allowed to go there. Because the fourth house contains your seat of conviction. Convictions create realities. So that seat of conviction, you can imagine it as a very sacred place. Because whatever sits there, that's what becomes manifest as a reality. That's what begins to tell a story that becomes a reality. So it's a place that is very well guarded because you're not going to allow anything there that is suspicious or anything there that is upsetting or anything there that is, frightening or fearful. In fact, once a strange type of consciousness tries to sit there, you will destroy it immediately. That's how powerful you are back there. So that, when they say that for someone to really have access to you, they have to know you and you must accept them. Because if they approach your consciousness, it is your fourth house that will determine how you open to them. Okay? So guard your convictions. But the interesting thing about convictions is that they are based on evidence because they are connected to a physical reality in that sense. And you can think of it as the process during which a child is learning what is the certainty in its reality. And it's going to map its brain around those certainties. One of the central pillars of certainty in a child's life, if all things are working correctly, is the primary caregiver, mother, father, it depends, or any other type of person that has provided a sense of consistency and safety for the developing mind. But it's not just people. It could be anything. Children are often attached to different types of things. Why do you think that's the case? It's because they have built a narrative, an unconscious narrative in that case, but a narrative nonetheless. They have built a narrative around those things. Those things have now come to represent safety. And the essence of safety is that it reduces anxiety. And when you have a strong stomach, then you can act. And the entire point of acting is that you are going to modify something or change something in your narrative. So this is what self-acceptance allows you to do. Because if you do not accept yourself, then what will happen is that the ego must still emerge, but it will emerge as a duplicate. Okay? Not as one thing. And we have one sun in the sky. So the duplicate is inconsistent. And simply what that means is that you will experience yourself as being there and then not being there. And such egos that tell stories like that, when they appear in duplicates, they are not carrying a strong conviction. And that means that you are only geared to accept or achieve only 50% of your objectives, because an objective is a goal. A goal is the focus of your sun. That's really what it is. So when the individual is not sitting correctly and you have this rejection because you cannot accept the things that are in the fourth house or the things that are embedded within the sign of Cancer, then the individual is at war with itself. And the individual cannot be at war with itself. How would that go? So the individual externalizes the conflict. And where does this externalization happen? It happens in the 7th house cusp or in Libra, because that's the screen upon which you are experiencing a reality. It's the screen that contains everything in existence outside of yourself. That's where it begins. And so your story needs to be able to cross into that level. And I've explained in various podcasts how that happens. But in the case of this not sitting correctly, well, what goes into Libra is something that is an individual that is literally working against themselves. One part is active, the other is passive, but powerful nonetheless because it sits in the unconscious. Now, the way to heal that, you must come back to the fourth house, whatever that symbolizes, whatever that signifies. You must come back there and you must reprocess the transaction such that you must regenerate acceptance, because acceptance is really a very strange thing. Because what is it that you're really trying to accept? You're trying to accept who you are. You would think it's the most basic thing, right? Wrong. That's why we call it a sit-in. It's very, very hard. So you have to be very aware of what is going on inside you and the dynamics of it all so that you can accept it. And acceptance is not an affirmation. Acceptance means that you stop judging yourself. That's simply what it is. You stop withholding your own sense of familiarity. It's like stopping yourself from going into your own house. And yet it's raining. Do you understand? It's an unconscious thing. So it's not, it comes before your will. So you cannot say, oh, I'm going to use my will to fix this. Your will cannot touch this. It will select its sense of conviction from the evidence around it. So it's going to select its truth from the environment and the context. It's why your environment is always important. If you want to make progress, or you want to change your mind, or you want to change your convictions, one of the most important things to do is to change your environment. It's not necessarily changing your location. It may be just changing your sense of familiarity. If there's something in there that is not working out well for you, or that's not sitting correctly, you might just want to change maybe more positive, more familiar settings. The only criteria for this is that your new settings or the changes, they must not trigger anxiety inside you. Because that's the entire point. You want a sense of safety because you want to heal and you want to regrow in that sense. Now, the regrowth will happen naturally. It's the healing that you must do by nursing the child that is within in that sense, okay? And there are ways to do this because it's not a function of your will. You have to it's almost like you have to abandon that will and what it needs or what it wants. Because despite what you think it is, it's not full yet. And you would know because how many objectives have you achieved? Because the essence of self-acceptance really is success. That's why Capricorn sits above the sign of Cancer. It's not a hidden success, it's a material success where whatever it is that you are desiring to achieve, you see it in your reality as part of your story. Okay? People tell you that you are successful. Okay? You experience it. And that's always a function of how something is sitting in the fourth house. Now, when Uranus is sitting in the fourth house, the task is to internalize that Uranus, to come to understand what it truly means, because it revolves around the way that you are mapping into a knowledge space. What type of knowledge are you retrieving? Because whatever it is, you have to construct full meaning out of it so that you know what it is. Because sometimes, in order to program a type of intuition into you, or a type of knowledge, it is programmed as behavioral responses. Okay? And when you look at the behavioral responses, they really don't connect into anything. You may have no reason why you are behaving this way or why you are responding this way. It simply doesn't make sense. In fact, some of the behaviors may be downright toxic. But guess what? When those behaviors crystallize into long-term memory, because you are building something gradually through space and through time. When you come into the awareness where you are able to see this structure, you will realize that it is a trajectory of knowledge. Something has been encoded inside you. That's what you now call your intuition. And that's what you apply to understand the nature of things. And one of the areas in which people apply these things is in the area of dynamics. How things move, what the outcomes of those movements are. You see people able to predict stock prices. They make a lucky pick, or they get lucky on the lottery or the numbers and things like that. Where do you think all of that is coming from? You think it's just luck? Well, whatever you call it, it's an outcome. And it needs to crystallize, meaning that it has a pathway wherein which it has occurred. Processes that link together to create that outcome. It's a very powerful thing when you come to understand it. Okay? So Uranus in the fourth house is someone who has access to that. But it's not sitting comfortably. It never really will sit comfortably. The essence is to create and generate a type of friction that allows that energy to be used in other places within the natal chart. And that's where you now find the whole, the complete picture. Because there's a knowledge that that Uranus is going to be generating all through your life. But it's going to split that knowledge across many crazy things. Things that individually, based on the way that you are living your life, there's really no connection between those things. It's only over time, after experiencing what looks like chaos, you now begin to see it if you become aware. Because that's what the Uranus wants. It wants you to emerge with this insight. And that's what you struggle to accept when you have Uranus in the fourth house. You struggle to accept that you are this kind of person. And as a result of that, you project the chaos. Because you will generate chaos. The way that knowledge is sitting in millions of different things that don't really have any relationship to each other. The relationship is you. You are the unity of those things. So the knowledge is sitting as the unity of all those things. But on the external reality, where you are basically living with other people or interacting with other people, you are a chaotic human being. And everybody knows it. The only person who doesn't is you. Simply because you cannot accept this. But the day that you accept it, you will bring your chaos back inside yourself, because it's not chaos. It's an antenna for tracking chaos. For instance, there's a process called stochasticity. Most natural processes in nature, they look very random in the sense that they appear to be nonsensical. If you look at the stock, when you still had a stock market, for instance, that were driven by fundamentals, stock picks are said to be random. At least that's what the efficient market hypothesis is talking about, even though it's not exactly the case. But you can imagine that you have things that look like a random walk or a Brownian motion in some sense. Okay. Like one of the equations that is used in pricing options and derivatives, right? It comes from the Black-Scholes equation. It's really an equation of noise. It's the random diffusion of heat, okay? But it is used in that equation to model an aspect of the market, or the financial markets that revolve around pricing risk. Well, how do you understand that type of system intuitively if you don't internalize your chaos? Because Uranus in the fourth house means that you are able to match those types of dynamics. You're able to synchronize with them. Yeah, okay, you need to accept the chaos around you because it's a reflection of something. You are not a normal person. You are someone who has an antenna sitting inside the deepest part of you in your seat of conviction. And the only things it will accept, really, the only evidence it will accept is that chaos. That's why Uranus in the fourth house struggles. Because people try to bring in order in that area because of what the house demands. Well, Uranus in the fourth house means that you must make order out of chaos. That's really what it is, okay? And whether you realize it or not, this is what happens as things begin to become very complex, okay? You've heard of entropy. Well, entropy is said to be some type of disorganization that grows. Well, it's not. There's really no such thing because nature doesn't know what that is. There's only the cost of retrieving things. When things become disorganized, we no longer know how it goes. We do not understand the dynamics anymore. In order to understand it, we have to simplify it, okay? So things are allowed to exist on levels of organization that are far more complex than we can just basically understand. But when you have Uranus in the fourth house, you have enough noise inside you that you can really match or pattern into anything in such a way that it can be useful. Neptune in the fourth house can match into every possible type of dynamism. The problem is that you can't retrieve useful information from it, because it will only feed your imagination. And if you do not have a way to connect that imagination to something happening in your everyday reality, then it will not be an asset. It will be a liability. Okay? Because that type of instability, it's going to be hard to work with in your everyday life. You appear like a crazy person, or like someone who's like here, there, and everywhere. No real stability. And this is also the case when you have Pisces on the cusp of the fourth, or you have Aquarius. Now, Aquarius is different in the sense that the picture that Uranus is trying to really put together, it's an Aquarian picture. It's just that it is scattered over a lot of time and space. Okay, so if you have Aquarius on the cusp of your fourth house, well, you have Uranus somewhere and it is gathering noise from that place in order to feed a certain type of structure which you have as that Aquarius, in order to give you a sense of self that you can now use to do what? To track these high-level dynamics. And the reason for this is because that knowledge or that information, it is always used elsewhere in your natal. That's what synthesis does. It looks at all these things and then puts the picture together, because like I've narrated it with Uranus, it exists with every other functional light. Okay, if you want to know more about it, my classes are the first step. My natal chart synthesis training classes. They're all online, so you can stream them whenever you want once you have purchased access to them. Okay, that's really what it is. Now, what is the essential point of it all? It's vision. Because all the knowledge that the Uranian insights are going to give you, you're going to use to form an Aquarian vision. And Aquarians are visionary people because it is within their minds that the future wakes up. And the reason why it is designed that way is because if you do not modify structure continually, then you will kill whatever it is. Because that's what being static does. Life requires the continuous processing of variation in a predictable manner, but in a manner that sits at the edge of chaos. And so these dynamisms are very important to life. And so you encode them as a human being, as part of yourself. And when you do not understand what that is, especially when Uranus is sitting strategically, like in the 4th house, then you run into all sorts of problems. If Uranus conjunct your IC, for instance, your nadir, the cusp of your 4th house, or it is conjunct any of the other angles, right? It brings an urgency of this thing, because prior to understanding what it is, it will create chaos, haphazardness in your life. And you will disown that chaos because nobody wants to be seen as someone who's, here, there, and everywhere in that sense. And that just compounds the problem. With this podcast, I hope that you come to understand that it's not a bad thing. You're just in the wrong environment, focusing on the wrong things because you have been given an intellect that is able to do much, much more. Because those with prominent Uranus placements, they are the retrievers of the knowledge that looks like chaos. Okay? If you went to the 16th century and showed them the equations of energy for quantum mechanical ensembles, they'll think it's all nonsense. Because why? Their type of thinking doesn't contain that level of movement yet. And so anyone in the 16th century that suddenly had an idea of this type of thing, they'd be laughed out of the room. They'll tell you such a thing doesn't exist. There's nothing like a wave function, They'll be correct because it doesn't belong to their time. And that's the problem of every Uranian in the 4th house. It's almost like you are an alien in some sense, or almost like you come from a future that most times you don't even know where that future is anymore. You are going to be like a fish out of water, especially if you find yourself in the area of where people are processing knowledge. Because if you're not in that area, nobody will even take you seriously to start with. Everyone's going to dismiss you because you sound like a crank, okay? And a lot of Uranians end up being conspiracy theorists. And it's not because they want to be conspiracy theorists, it's because Uranus requires that you feed it. Because it must form those patterns. It doesn't matter what you do. Once it's an essential part of you, you will express that part of you. But what are you expressing? What are the haphazard patterns that carry genius that you're expressing? Well, if you don't have the right materials to express in the correct way, you will express whatever. You will connect whatever to whatever, or you become prone to those type of connections. Okay? The Uranian becomes powerful when he's able to explain what is going on in the language of its day. That's when you become powerful, because now you have your 2 feet spread across 2 time intervals, or 2 spatial intervals. It means that you can connect the future to the past and the past to the future. Then you stand out. Okay? And some people think it's a level of advancement that, okay, some type of incremental advancement. An incremental advancement is a logic. 1 + 1 = 2. Uranus is beyond logic. It has its own logic on its own. 1 + 1 may be 2, but in Uranian logic, you can intuitively know that A goes to Z. And as at the time you know this, you have no idea that there is even a letter B. But somehow you know that once you start at A, you must eventually arrive at Z in the English language. You have no idea how you know. And nobody may even know English. So you have no idea what the value of what you know really is. Journal. Write it down. Because you're building a holistic map that you don't know. So if you don't have enough pieces, you won't even know that there's a puzzle to solve in the first place. And every aspect of your behavior as it manifests, it is carrying some part of that puzzle. Even if it looks like chaos in the world around you, accept it. It is you. That's it. All right? As long as you're not going mental, because if you go mental, then you'll be put in an asylum. And that's Saturn's way of guarding against complete sudden overthrow. Rebellion. Because that's a Uranian character, a Uranian trait. You have Uranus in the 4th house because it's not sitting correctly in that sense, because it's not meant to be there in some sense. So even though you can come to accept it and get to use it, it's still not comfortable. And when that happens, the individual harbors a great amount of rebellion within their nature. They will not be told what to do. And if they accept you as telling them what to do, then they don't really mean it, even if they think they do. Because the moment they come to realize themselves, they're throwing all of that away. It has to be their way. Because the structure they carry inside them is not something that you replicate easily. They can't even explain what it is. This will obviously show up in their family lives. Uranus in the 4th house will not have a traditional type of family. They will not have a traditional type of comfort either. Because even though they may think that that's what they want, when they get it, it's just a question of time before they begin to see it as restrictive. And once that happens, they will default to their nature, because you really can't be anything but yourself. Okay? And until they're able to express themselves constructively in the world, people will see them as sort of chaotic, unreliable. They would see a buzz, even though they wouldn't know what it is. But all in all, they will come off as, it's like they move too much, or they talk too much, or they express too much, or when they're trying to explain something, they keep jumping from one thing to another without any coherency at all. Whatever it is, that's who they are. That's what they must accept, because they must know what it means, and they must find their group, because you're only advanced and you only feel like a fish out of water because you're not in the right place. Uranus in the 4th house means that you are destined to belong to some type of organization or some type of group where people are expressing these types of advanced understandings. It's why a lot of them, they're very inclined towards astrology. Okay, they just seem to get it, Traditionally, Uranus was described as a fire. The type of fire that you come to call the Holy Spirit. Why? Because it's the type of, consciousness. Now, the symbolism of fire is always consciousness. Okay? The energy to drive things forward, or the energy to destroy things in that sense. All right? So, Uranus being symbolized by that fire is representative of a certain type of knowledge, a type of consciousness. And what it is that connection to the future. And like I've said, it's not a future really. It's just an organizational pattern that is not in its time yet. That's Uranus.